You're lying in bed with a fever, eyes closed, and then it starts. A pattern. Small at first. Maybe a grid. A spiral. A strange lattice of shapes appearing in the darkness behind your eyelids. You try to ignore it, but it doesn't disappear. It grows, tile by tile, loop by loop, spreading through more and more of the darkness. And then something even stranger happens. It feels like it's getting bigger. Not farther away. Not closer. Bigger. As if something is expanding inside your head. You know there's nothing actually there. Your eyes are closed. The room hasn't changed. And yet the sensation feels completely real. If you've ever experienced something like this during a fever, you're not necessarily imagining it. And the strange part is, the shapes may not be random. Start with the fever itself. A fever isn't simply your body overheating. It's a regulated rise in body temperature, usually triggered by your immune system's response to infection. And your brain is extremely sensitive to changes in the body's internal environment. When you're sick, your temperature changes. Your sleep can become disrupted. You can become dehydrated, exhausted, or develop a headache. All of those things can affect how your brain processes information. And that matters because your visual system doesn't simply switch off when you close your eyes. Your eyes stop sending normal information about the outside world. But activity in the visual system continues. Neurons are still communicating. Networks are still interacting. Your brain is still generating and interpreting signals. Most of the time, you never notice any of this. The brain turns all of that activity into a stable visual experience. But when the system is disturbed, some of that normally hidden activity can become noticeable. And sometimes what emerges isn't random noise. It can look strangely geometric, which raises a question. Why grids? Why spirals? Why tunnels? Why repeating patterns? Why do people who have never met each other sometimes describe remarkably similar shapes? Part of the answer may lie in the architecture of the visual system itself. In the early 20th century, psychologist Heinrich Klüver studied unusual visual experiences associated with altered states of consciousness. He noticed that certain geometric forms appeared again and again. Spirals, lattices, tunnels, honeycomb-like patterns. He called these recurring forms form constants. Klüver wasn't specifically studying fever hallucinations, but his observations became important because they suggested something fascinating. Some unusual visual experiences may be shaped by the structure of the visual system itself. Your visual cortex isn't a random collection of neurons. It's organized into networks that process things like edges, orientation, contrast, movement, and spatial relationships. And researchers have proposed that unusual patterns of activity within those networks can sometimes produce geometric experiences resembling the forms Klüver described. So the brain may not be inventing a completely random picture. It may be producing activity according to the same underlying machinery that normally allows you to see the world. In a strange sense, the geometry may be coming from the system that normally hides the machinery from you. But that still leaves the strangest part. Why does the pattern seem to grow? Why can something that isn't physically moving feel as though it's expanding inside your head? This is where perception gets even stranger. In 1955, psychiatrist John Todd described a collection of perceptual distortions that became known as Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. The name sounds playful. The experience isn't. People experiencing these distortions can temporarily perceive objects, body parts, distances, or spaces as much larger or smaller than they really are. A room can suddenly feel enormous. Your hands can seem strangely far away. Objects can appear tiny. Even your sense of time can become distorted. These experiences have been associated with migraines, infections, epilepsy, and other neurological conditions, particularly in children. But the important idea isn't the name. It's what the phenomenon reveals about perception. Your brain doesn't have a tiny ruler measuring the world. It estimates size, distance, movement, space, and it builds your experience of those things by combining many different signals. Most of the time, those signals agree. So a room simply feels like a room. But when the systems involved in perception temporarily stop agreeing perfectly, your experience of scale can change. The room didn't actually grow. Your brain changed how large the room seemed. And something similar may help explain why an internally generated pattern can feel as though it's expanding. The pattern doesn't necessarily have to become physically larger. Your brain's interpretation of its size or movement can change. The image remains inside the visual system, but your experience of its scale does not. And suddenly, a tiny shape becomes enormous. But there's another part of this experience. The pressure, that strange sensation that the growing pattern isn't merely being seen, but is somehow pushing against the inside of your skull. There probably isn't one universal explanation for that sensation. When you're sick, you can experience headaches, fatigue, dehydration, muscle tension, changes in sleep, and other physical sensations. At the same time, your brain may be processing unusual visual activity. Those signals don't necessarily remain separate. Your brain constantly combines information from different parts of the body into a single experience. So a physical sensation in your head can become linked with an unusual visual experience. You don't experience two completely separate events. You experience one, a pattern growing, and something pushing outward behind it. The image becomes physical. The physical sensation becomes part of the image. And suddenly it feels as though something is expanding inside your head. Nothing necessarily is, but the sensation itself is real. And that reveals something much bigger about perception. Your brain isn't a camera. It doesn't simply record reality. It takes information from your eyes, your body, your surroundings, your memories, and countless internal signals, and turns all of that into the world you experience. You don't experience raw electrical activity. You experience a room, a vase, a tree, a hand, distance, movement, space. It all feels effortless, as if the world simply arrives exactly as it is. But underneath that experience is an enormous network of neurons constantly processing information, making predictions, comparing signals, and constructing what you perceive. You normally experience the finished product. You never see the machinery until something disrupts it. Then the darkness behind your closed eyes can suddenly fill with geometry. Spirals, grids, tunnels, expanding shapes. Not necessarily because something entered your mind, but because your mind was never truly empty in the first place. There was always activity beneath the darkness. The illness may simply have changed the conditions under which you became aware of some of it. And perhaps that's what makes this experience so unsettling. For a few moments, you aren't simply looking at the world. You're catching a glimpse of the system that normally creates what you see. And there's something reassuring about that, too. A strange visual experience during a fever does not automatically mean that your brain is being permanently damaged. These kinds of unusual perceptions can occur during illness, sleep deprivation, migraines, medications, and other changes in brain function. But severe confusion, difficulty waking, seizures, breathing problems, persistent hallucinations, or other serious neurological symptoms are different and warrant medical attention. For a brief, isolated experience, though, the experience can be incredibly vivid without necessarily meaning that something is permanently wrong. Think about how strange that is. You've spent your entire life looking at the world through the same biological machine. You see walls, faces, trees, clouds, your bedroom, and you assume you're simply seeing reality. But beneath that effortless experience is a system constantly turning signals into shapes, distances, movement, and space. You normally see the result. You never see the process. Until one night, with a fever burning through your body, the room goes dark. Your eyes close, and the pattern begins. A grid, a spiral, something expanding into the darkness. Except now you know what you're looking at. Not a creature, not something growing inside your skull, not a hidden world behind your eyes. Just your brain, briefly running under different conditions, and giving you a glimpse of the machinery that was there all along.